welcome to the Architectural Archives at the Weitzman School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm Fritz Steiner, and I'm proud to be the school's dean and Paley Professor. As you might guess from my surroundings, I'm not at the archives tonight, but Laurie Olin is, along with Bill Whitaker, the curator and collections manager at the archives. Thanks for joining us for this very special installment of our Fall 2020 lecture series. I'm not supposed to have favorites, but I've been especially looking forward to the event tonight. We're here to celebrate the latest book from Laurie Olin, France Sketchbooks, published by ORO Editions. For most of you, Laurie hardly needs introducing. He's been a partner and founder at the Philadelphia-based firm Olin, and he taught in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning at Penn for over 40 years. Laurie is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the American Society of Landscape Architects, and a recipient of the 1998 Award in Architecture from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. His award-winning designs include Bryant Park in New York City, the Getty Center in Los Angeles, and the Barnes Foundation right here in Philadelphia. His redesign of the Washington Monument Grounds received a 2008 Design Honor Award from the American Society of Landscape Architects. Laurie and his 5 partners received the 2008 Landscape Design Award from the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum. He is a recipient of the 2012 National Medal of Arts, the highest Lifetime Achievement Award for artists and designers bestowed by the National Endowment for the Arts and the President of the United States. And I would just add, there's only been 4 landscape architects who have received the National Medal of Art, and 3 of the 4 have their archives with the Penn Weitzman School archives. Laurie also holds the 2011 American Society of Landscape Architects Medal, the Society's highest award for a landscape architect. And in 2019, Laurie earned an honorary doctorate from Penn, which puts him in the company of Brian Stevenson, John Bon Jovi, and Temple Grandin, to name a few. For about 50 years now, Laurie has recorded aspects of France, its cities and countrysides, its streets and cafes, the ancient ruins, vineyards, and parks, from the humble to the grand, things that interested his designer's eye. Tonight, he's agreed to give us a tour of that body of work. Along with Laurie, I wish to congratulate the book's designer, Pablo Mandel, director of Curricular Studio. One note about the format for the program tonight, we'll be using a Q&A instead of chat. So if you have, we're gonna have a Q&A session with Dr. Olin at the end of this session. So please put your questions in the Q&A. With that, Bill, it's wonderful to turn it over to Bill Whitaker.
Well, thank you, Fritz. As Fritz said, we're here in the Architectural Archives, and it's exciting to be here with Laurie and to have an event that we could open the archives up. I think all of you know that we're part of the school, and that really the collections here are energized around the idea of teaching architects and landscape architects, planners and historic preservationists, and to really get at what creative imagination is all about and how people do things out in the world of consequence, of lasting value. And so it's our aim tonight to use the collection in teaching and to take a little time to talk to Laurie Olin about his wonderful new book. And you see reflections here because there's a piece of plexiglass between me and the camera. And I'm going to put my mask on in a moment. But this is a really wonderful book, and we're going to explore its making and among other things. And so it's a favorite story of mine to, that we use these collections. And one of the first objects we got from Laurie was this amazing scroll about 13 feet long, where his boss, then boss at the time, Rich Haig, asked him to sit down and try to figure out what to do with these gas tanks and things on, Seattle's south side. And Laurie sat down, and over the course of, he tells me, 2 or 3 hours, started at one side with markers and then rough pencils. And towards the end of this 2-3 hour period, he starts to use the fine nib of an ink pen and kind of cementing in ideas. And so I love to show that to students and make a drama out of unrolling it and bringing it out, and telling them the story of just what it takes to begin something. And so it was very gratifying. Some years ago, a class came from Ohio, and that's an object that I showed them. And lo and behold, a few months later, they sent me a photograph, and their student projects were all your project on a scroll. So everything was 13 feet long. Everything was wonderful and inspired, and it ties back to an experience here in the archives, and it also ties back to Laurie and our guest of this evening. So we're going to be discussing the making of the book. We're going to, explore why France. We're going to think about the making of a book. We're going to talk about taking time out, and then the basics of drawings in Sketchbook. Of course, that's kind of what it all comes back to. And at some point, I'm going to come around the screen. I'm going to put my mask on. Laurie's going to put his mask on, and we're going to zoom right in and really take a close look over Laurie's shoulder. I think, this is, I think, a very rare opportunity to do it like this. We'll see how it turns out. But just know in that moment, we're going to be taking the safety precautions of wearing masks and things like that. But the university and, occupational safety, say that this is safe what we're doing. So we've asked Laurie to go ahead and be able to speak to us with his mask off. So I'm going to put my mask on. Then I'm going to switch the camera. So you look at Laurie.
Hi. Good morning or evening. Hi, everybody.
And so let's get started. Laurie, this is a book about travel. This is a book about travel sketches. And we're in the middle of a global pandemic where nobody can travel anywhere, it seems. So I wonder, and that there's no end in sight of the travel restrictions. So, what have you done in this time? You can't go anywhere.
Well, thanks, Bill. It's been kind of puzzling. I thought, like many people, well, since we've got this time out, I think I'll get a lot done. And I've drawn very little. I've got less done than I thought I was going to get done. And I think, like everyone else, I've been sort of totally floored by it at first, and it's taken a while to get back out and up and functioning. I've been working at the office, of course, because the office is everybody. We have all the people working from home, and so I worked on that. And I was drawing this morning on a project we're doing in Los Angeles on the table in our loft here in Philadelphia. But for a conference we then had later in the afternoon with our folks in Los Angeles and Frank Gehry's office. But so I've been working on the things in the office, and I've been able to write a bit, but not draw a lot because I haven't been in the mood. And it's very puzzling to me because that's been my MO since I was in high school. When in doubt, go draw. So, but the travel, the funny thing about the book, it's not really a travel book. It's a book about sketches. It's a book about drawing. It's a book about learning, and it's a book about going somewhere. And so it may seem a little, I don't know, frustrating. It was frustrating to try to get the thing printed and distributed and sold in this climate where to bring a book out at the time when every school is closed, every library is closed, every bookstore is closed. It really was not a great timing on launching the book. And France may seem a little peculiar and a feat to some of our students these days, but it taught me an awful lot about the world on some of my trips. And one of the things I can say, and we'll look at this maybe later, but this sketchbook is number 17. I started sketchbooks when I was in high school. And one of the things is that the first trip I ever took to Europe when I was, I guess, 29 years old was to France. And I drew, but it had a huge effect upon me because it was my introduction to European public space and public life. And one of the things about it was I found myself absolutely beguiled by how the French used their cities to live in outdoors and with each other. And so I started drawing some. And so over the years, I came and went to France. I later, lived in Italy for 2 years. And, Paris is not my favorite city in the world, probably. It's one of them. I love Paris. Maybe Rome is my favorite city. And I write about this in the book. There's a couple little mini essays. But one of the things I say in there is that it's not that I think France is the end all be all, but it's where I learned so much by looking so much. And I came and went so many times that at one point a few years ago, my wife said, "What are you going to do with all these sketchbooks? You've got to do something." And I thought, yeah, I really do. And so the first thing I did with them was the book Be Seated, which is the book that precedes it. ORO published that too. And there's a few sketches in Be Seated that are also in here in France, but are from France. But it taught me so much. And so we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But so it's not that it's about France. It's not about travel. It's about how I learned to teach myself to look at the world around me in much more detail and much more carefully than I had before, in terms of large and sitting still, all the stuff I write about, how I love to draw. I do. It's a way to be in the world that, in this digital era we're in, where people spend so much time with a screen right in front of them with all this artificial stuff and photos. And the notion that you could actually just go sit in the world and look at it directly, and then sort of your eye is looking at a real thing, and you look at a page and there's nothing on the page, it's nothing there. And so you make a mark and you look back and then you make another mark and you're calm. And one of the things that happens then is that, our eyes are really not a separate organ like your liver, or your pancreas. The eyes are actually a piece of the brain. There's these two holes in the skull, and part of your brain hangs out looking around. And so, visual information goes straight into the brain. And so the notion of being able to engage that information and try to record it thoughtfully is what the sketchbooks are really all about. And so we'll go back to that in a way in a little while, I think. But so France was the jumping off point, and I used it because I think there are like 21 or 22 different sketchbooks that material's taken from in this book. I mean, I have more. I have 30 more, 38 or more from Italy. But so it's and actually you'll see when we look in the sketchbooks in a few minutes that very rarely is a whole sketchbook from France. There'll be some sketches from my passing through France or doing a job in Europe, or I've gone there for 2 weeks or something. But the rest of the sketchbook is other stuff. There'll be other places. There'll be work. There'll be thoughts. There'll be notes. So the sketchbooks are a way of recording things. And they're very different what you record, as you'll see in a few minutes. And the book, the thing I like about the thing I produced here is that it takes you really into the sketchbooks. Pablo, as Fritz mentioned, Pablo is a wonderful book designer. And one of the things that happened was he would do a thing where he would just go with a camera right into some of the drawings. And some of these drawings are larger in the publication than they are in the original. And you really see how much is in them. It's really surprising.
So this isn't your first book. I mean, a few years ago, you and I had the pleasure of doing an exhibition with you, and we spent a lot of time looking at your drawings. And you brought out a couple of sketchbooks that you had made by hand. One of them I'll describe as The Armadillo Meets the Highway, which was a cross-country trip of the US. And then another is just this incredible time you spent on an island in the Puget Sound, and these are like hand-stitched books.
I made the books. I made the books myself, and then I filled them. I had this idea. I don't know. There was going to be like a narrative poem, or it was going to be like a piece of music with a beginning, middle, and end. And so the books are somewhat composed. They're a little bit intuitive, as you can imagine, but yeah, that's true.
Well, if those are your first books, I mean, you wind up doing a book about the English landscape across an open field, also Skid Row in Seattle. And so why don't you talk a little bit about I mean, you've touched on it a bit, just, making a book, why make a book and what is this all about? Why do you do it?
I have to say it's not blind ambition and it's not for money. I got a note from a press today that a book that's been out there for a while and has sold 5,200 and so many copies, the royalties for this year was $7.95 for me, and that because it's less than $15, they don't send me anything. So you don't do it for that, okay? I don't think you do it for honor and glory. I think you do it because my books at least have to do with, I have an idea or a message, or I've seen something I want to share. And so they're, on the one hand, they're quite often, shall I say, vocational, educational. Like the Skid Row book was about a community that people didn't understand and hated, and people hated, we demonized the poor in our country. And so I lived on Skid Row, and I had a studio there in Seattle, and I wanted to spend time figuring out what's going on as kind of the human ecology of downtown Seattle. And it was an alternative community that was not understood. So I followed them around, figured out what their patterns were, how they ate, how they slept, how they financed themselves, and what their problems beyond medical and housing, of course. And it was fascinating, but I wanted to share that with people who were busy trying to smash Skid Row. They want to smash Skid Row. But I said, if you do that, it's going to be like homogenized milk. You have little pieces of cream, or in this case, homeless, all over the city. That they actually had a community that was almost working and needed help. They needed housing and they needed some other support. So that book came out of a kind of social conscience, but also a kind of curiosity about, I used to joke that it's because I feared I'd end up there, but I don't think that was it. The English book, which was the next book, I went to England one summer. I thought I was having a nervous breakdown, so I went to England and spent this time. It was 1960, when was it? 1970, and the whole world was coming apart. Everybody had been assassinated. There were riots. I was having a real breakdown. So I went to England for the summer and stayed with some friends near Oxford. And the English landscape blew me away. I mean, it really had a lot to do with how I became a landscape architect. And I just decided late in that summer that the English didn't understand the English landscape either. And so I thought, I'll explain it to them. I mean, talk about hubris. What kind of nutty young American thinks you go explain a piece of Europe to Europe? But I did. And so that began a project, and it took me, I don't know, almost 20 years to do that book. Because I came back and then got involved in teaching and starting to practice, and it was hard to finish the book. But that book has, over 120 page illustrations, and it all done in the field, walking around. And I taught myself a lot about the English landscape, walking around in it. And so that book became a labor of love, and also real scholarship, original scholarship, etc. So books, from me, usually there's something starts it or triggers it. And so the Be Seated was, I realized that I'd been doing all these public spaces that were really about how people socialize, and part of the secret of them was how they sat and where they sat. And that's something I learned on this first trip to France. And so it led me to eventually, like in Bryant Park, introduce loose chairs and tables, which was common in Europe, but not here at the time. And people said, "Oh, no, it's New York; they'll steal them." And I said, "Well, yeah, maybe. You can put a chain around them like they do in France or something." But yeah, they got a few get stolen and broken. But what happens is that in my case, I felt there was a tale to be told about the public realm. And one way to do it was about public seating, outdoor seating, and something that's become a sort of bit of a hobby horse of mine. So I think this book was about, the interesting thing is there was no narrative. None of these drawings were done because I was going to do a book. It's really kind of odd in that I thought, how am I going to organize this? Because these are random events. This is me just being there at different times, seeing things and putting it down and storing them up. And then I thought, well, I could share them, and actually I could explicate them a bit about how a designer sees the world and how a designer learns from the world through being in it and drawing it. So that's what the book's about. So the book, I mean, there's a big chunk of the book is about Paris. You know, how can you talk about France if you don't talk about Paris? But there's also parts of it that are about Bordeaux and the area around Bordeaux, and there's Provence, and there's Normandy, and there's other parts. But it's not all about France. It's not a tour book. It doesn't have a narrative thread that tells you that the point of this book was X. Because the point of the book is really, each piece is its own little mini essay, which is what drawings are.
Yeah. Well, should we look at some drawings?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So
okay, now we have to mask up here.
yeah, we have to mask up. And I'm going to pick up the camera
Okay.
and come around. And I'm going to be over Laurie's shoulder.
Now, let's see. Let's see how this works. Okay.
We're going to figure it out as we go along. And I realize I left my notes, and I need to keep time.
Okay. Well, I'll try and move along here. So these sketchbooks here, Bill, these are not all of them. Obviously, there's not 28 sketchbooks. This is only 10 or 11. This one is actually falling apart, needs to be rebound, as you see. They're in kind of bad shape. But this is the first sketchbook. This is the first drawing I ever made in Europe. And it's interesting because it's a woman arranging flowers in the Café Voltaire. And what could be more French and what could be more appropriate for a landscape architect arriving in France to see a woman arranging flowers? But this sketchbook also has my first trip down to Provence and everything. And one of the things to say to people who are interested in such things is, it's just a fountain pen. It was plain paper, and you make some lines, and then you want a wash, so you shake the pen and ink comes out, and then you spit and smear it around. So this is just a fountain pen with saliva and me.
Excellent.
But it works, but I mean, so that's an example of making things up as you go. That's the first sketchbook. So there are sketches here that are not chronological because they're more geographic. I mean, here's another one where I'm back in Provence. And what you see here is a kind of designer's notes. Here's a plan that explains a restaurant that faces two ways into a square. There's some notes about what was going on. Here's an arch, a Roman arch at Les Antiques, right nearby at Saint-Rémy, where Van Gogh was in the hospital. So these are early drawings of mine. This is from 1972, and they're just fountain pen, Roman ruins and that sort of thing. Here's a drawing from Aix-en-Provence. We were headed for Italy at the time. And so this is a big traffic jam with swirling around this fountain that oddly enough had the Three Graces on top of it. And here's the Cours Mirabeau, marvelous street that that Alan Jacobs talks about in his book, Great Streets. So these sketches they're a sort of aid memoir. They don't tell you what to do. You don't copy them in your work. And in fact, some of them, are quite random, like this one here. There's some tulips that in our apartment in Paris. This is one of my favorite sketches in the Louvre. One of my favorite paintings of Delacroix. I go back to it all the time. It's the women in Algiers. But then this sketchbook, what you can do with it is these little sketchbooks. They fit in your pocket, but also they're vertical, and so they really work with some of the proportions of these Belle Epoque buildings in Paris. I was interested in the proportion of that window, and these colors are quintessentially Parisian, the slate roofs, the plaster, and then the proportions of the French windows with this hardware and the grills that keep the kids from falling out the window. Here's another one, again, in the Louvre. So this one has, but then, there's other stuff in this book. Like here's me working on Columbus. When I got home, I had to go back to work, and I was working on Columbus Circle and trying to figure out how to come through the berms and have the fountain and that sort of thing. And so there's drawings So the sketchbooks are full of all sorts of stuff. So a little seemingly random. Let's see. I want to look at this big book for a minute. This is a larger sketchbook, and you'll notice that one of the things I'm fond of is this landscape format, which is horizontal, not portrait format, the binding on the narrow end, because when you open them up, you have amplitude, which landscapes have amplitude. And so in this particular case, this sketch, this is in the Tuileries. I mean, no, the Jardin Luxembourg, rather, excuse me. But one of the things about it was I had fun doing this drawing. It took a while, obviously. It took about, this is probably about 2 hours. But I was sitting there, and it was a beautiful day. And what this drawing was about is about seeing and how the eye starts, and it looks at stuff up close. Then it moves off into the distance. This runner came, and so I added the runner. He's running off into the distance toward the palace. Then you look along here and you go over here and you pass, and you go way out to the trees, and they're silhouetted off in the distance as this railing and this urn and stuff. And so the notion of this drawing is the way the eye moves around in a landscape. It also leaves out stuff, you know, don't draw everything, you don't have to draw everything. So the notion that drawings can be, they can have ideas like that about how you look and how you see things. They can also do things like, let's see. Well, here's another one of these little books. The little books compared to the big books, you know, they're all different sizes and shapes. But this one, for instance, I went to see this fabulous abbey that has these great capitals. This Romanesque abbey in Sauve-Maujour near Bordeaux. And it's a beautiful ruin. It finally collapsed in the 18th, 19th century. But what Pablo did in the book was he took that little sketch here in the back. We'll see what he did. This is why you should, designers should trust other designers. So he shows in the book, and one of the things this book does very well is he shows you the whole sketchbook. Then he takes you right into the watercolor detail. And so you can see this is smaller than the original, and that's bigger than the original. But the color is actually very, very good. The ORO fussed with it, and he fussed with it. So it's really, the book helps people see the drawings, I think. I think that's one of the things Pablo did so well. And so there's all kinds of stuff in here, you know, like I'm measuring the height of the Bordeaux Cabernet vineyard grapes there, but I also am drawing them. You know, this is the beautiful vineyards these are. Here's the grapes. This is wine on the hoof, you know, right there. But I was also curious about how close they were to the ground. And so I talked to somebody why the grapes aren't up here, sorry. And what he said was, well, it has to do with the heat coming from the ground up and the cool nights and trying to keep them from doing that, you know, so they grow. There are a lot of different things in these sketchbooks, but it's not really a travelogue so much as it is how to see things. For instance, I was looking at the famous tapestry, the Bayeux tapestry. I didn't draw the whole tapestry. It's 100 feet long or something like that. It's amazing. But one of the things I noticed was the dividers between each episode. There'd be, everybody gets in a boat, and then there's a divider, and then there's the boat lands, and there's a divider. And one of the things was the dividers were these trees that were like a forest. But what they did was it's a Gothic arches and crockets. And I realized, oh, look at that. That these people have this kind of idea of how these branches intertwine that produce these shapes that are in their cathedrals. And so this is, while this may be a picture of a wonderful, this is the largest wood church left in France, in Honfleur, but that detail, I thought, that's interesting. And so the things are about ideas as much as they are about other things. Quite often there will be a plan. This little village, I thought this was a very interesting village. This is where Ravel orchestrated a few things. But there's a triangular open space with a road going by one end. And then they put this pavilion, the market building, this building you see here, across the end to seal the road and give frontage to the road, but also produce a safe space behind for the stalls and vegetables. So this little sketch is me learning about how that village is organized in that brilliant public space. You know, this is just therapy doing the back of the church. Monet did the front of this building and did a much better job.
Right. So what are you writing here? I mean, we've seen a lot of writing, and so what are you getting at?
Well, what did I say? I said the market shelter in the square jammed into the triangular space, forming a street and a square. And then here I'm talking about the lunch we had, but also the pile of rocks we were sitting on is probably from the rubble from the bombing of this building, and they just covered it and just didn't, you know, they pushed all the ruined buildings into a mound, and that's what we're sitting on. So the notes tend to be, this is a conference at Chantilly. This, for instance, is a drawing at Monet's Giverny, and this is his water lilies. But one of the things is Victoria, my wife, and I were going around, and she was identifying plants for me, and I was writing down what the plants were, and that sort of thing. So there's particular combinations that we thought were very nice in the herbaceous gardens. And I was interested, I was currently working on a couple of ponds, and I was interested in the edge margin planting. So I was noting which plants were planted along the edge of the pond. Not everybody knows about the lilies, but how about that edge?
So when you started this drawing, I mean, you start as a conversation with Vicky, and you're starting to pick up the details in the scene.
Right.
And so one might think about this not so much as a composition, but as a conversation.
Well, it is. And that's what a lot of these are. Quite often, they're conversations with myself and with the place. You know,
Right.
I mean, for instance, let's look here. This sketchbook. This is.
What about putting your name in the front of your sketchbook? Just stop on that for a second, because that's like lesson number one with sketchbooks, right?
I have lost 4 over the last 45 years, and 3 of them came back. Only 1 never came home.
Where did you lose it?
That one I lost. That one was in Charleston, South Carolina, and on the waterfront somewhere on a weekend day in the morning. Now here, what you see, it says, if found, please contact or return to my name, my address, a phone number, a fax number. This is before we all would. Now I put down my internet, my email, and then it says reward. And everyone who's ever sent me anything, I always send them a reward. And it doesn't say what it is, but it just gives people the motive, I think.
What's a proper reward for returning a sketchbook like this?
Oh, well, I don't know. The last one was when it was somebody in San Francisco sent it to me. And I think I sent him a $100 gift thing at a bookstore. So I thought, because these are priceless to me.
Yeah.
So this is a book that there's a bunch of drawings from this are in my new book. This one's up front near the introduction, but this is from Haute-Provence, which is an area just north of Aix-en-Provence, and to the right of to the east of the Luberon. And this is, for instance, a place I used to go walking out into this. This is actually a vineyard. I'm looking across the tops of the vines toward a little range of hills, and through that crack is the Rhone River there. So this is a floodplain of the Rhone River. That's a Crusader castle up on top. And one of the things that you see, this is the Maisodria, the farmhouses of the French peasants of the time. This is property that belonged to the Popes of Avignon, and they still make pretty good wine there, as we know, Côte de Rhône. But so this book is full of stuff from there, and some of it is, we're spending time. So some of it is this meditation on. These happen to be, of course, as you recognize, the various food stuff. So we've got food, we have flowers, we have crockery, we have the stone walls of it, we have a door going outside. And so your eye just kind of moves along through all this detail and ends up over at the kitchen stove if you're reading from right to left. But in this book, there are other things like this. There are watercolors of the place we were staying. I did that drawing several times, several ways, in ink and in pencil. And so there's details of chairs, there's a study of the courtyard. There's people at a cafe in Avignon. But here's an example of something that I've always been very interested in, and that is the ordinary. But in a drawing, one is interested in other things. The drawings have their own logic. And in this case, I mean, here's figs and a linen napkin, and then a woven rush mat, place mat, and then a glass with flowers. And the combination couldn't be more provincial, Parisian, European. But what interests me in this drawing was all the different colors, textures, and what they all meant to each other. You know, the woven plaited basket that the figs are sitting in. So so this is about a way of life. And so one of the things about why France, back to that, it's a lot of the drawings have to do with aspects of France that have to do with, they're not the grand monuments, they're not historic things, they're about what they have done to have a good life for most of the people. And the quality of life and the things that actually produce a quality of life that are not, you know, cathedrals and monuments, but are the way people actually live, what they touch, what they feel, what they see, what they eat. And I was so taken, for instance, by this pair of chairs. I couldn't believe them. They were so comfortable, the most comfortable chairs I ever sat in. And I thought, oh, they're so slouchy and they're perfect. So I measured them. You can see all the measurements here. And then I thought the linen that was on it was so nice. There's the color. So, and the interesting thing was they were similar, but different, these two chairs. They were very similar, but they were different chairs. And the linen was similar, but different. And so what was the broad stripe here was the trim here. What was the trim broad stripe here was the trim here. And so there's reversals. So it's this harmonious diversity that I thought, oh my God, this is really, there's a lesson in that for a designer. You know? So one of the things about these sketchbooks is that they're about me learning. Oh, there's Liz Platter-Zyberg. This is work. Here we go. We're back to, oh, that's somewhere else. But one of the things that happens is that drawing is a way to be in the world, you know, and it's a way to see and digest things and try and what happens is I don't go back and look at these a lot because I've entered the information. You know, it's already in there. And so you do things like, for instance, I was going to show you, where's this other study? Let's look here. Here's a thing that I think every student should know how to do this. Let me see if I find it. It was here a minute ago. I've confused myself. No. Oh, here. Let's look at this book. Here's a drawing I did one Sunday morning in Paris. I just went out. It's kind of calm and quiet. And it's cool. And it's Place Furstenberg and Saint-Germain. And this is the plan of it. Here's the street. There's the dimensions. Here's the square, the dimensions. Here's the little island in the middle with the way the pavement works. There's 4 trees and a light in the middle. And I sort of drawing this as me talking about what I'm listening to while I'm sitting there, because you're sitting there long enough, you hear things. You hear people talking, you hear the cars come and go, birds. In this case, one heard the people come out and lock their doors, and then with their rolling suitcases go over the pavement to their cars to leave for the weekend. You know, so they're all bailing out of town, and I'm sort of enjoying it. One of the things I noted was I said the Polonias are majestic, blah, 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 but I also said here that since my last visit, 2 of the old Polonias have died and been replanted, and the 2 benches have been removed, undoubtedly to prevent derelicts from hanging out. I resent it, however, having to sit on the pavement and to rest in the gutter, basically. And so I said, interesting rough asphalt, blah, blah, blah. So I've got a plan. I know what the sections are. I know what it looks like. And it's one of the most beautifully proportioned spaces I've ever been in my life. And it has all the accoutrements you need. Wonderful high ground floor, excellent proportion between solid and void, this nice space to drive around, 4 trees, it has 2 benches and 1 light. And it was the economy of it and the simplicity of it really appealed to me. Also Polonias, which
in America up until Paul Philip Cray planted some here. There was
Logan Circle, right?
the Logan Circle. It was considered a weed tree, and it grew by railroads and comes up in the junk and the gravel and stuff like that. But in Paris, they were used as this glorious street tree, which of course they are, because they get these big, tall spikes of flowers on. So this pale violet, they're very beautiful. So that's an example of a designer in a space, learning from the space, being careful to record it. This is me looking at, Bernard Huet had recently rebuilt the Champs-Élysées. And so I was very interested in his drain details and how he put stuff together and making notes. And again, I made some dimensions and I looked at the fixtures. That they're a little overwrought, but they were actually kind of grand, and it's a grand street. This is me making notes at Jardin Atlantique. And then, here's an example of that chair. I thought was a pretty good chair. It was a metal and plastic chair in the Tuileries. And this was me having lunch, and it was just a cheap sandwich and a bottle of beer, obviously. Nice big glass, for this beer. But and an odd metal detail around the planters that I thought was kind of interesting. And I thought, it's not straight. It has a slight curve to it. That was very interesting, expensive, but nice. And then here's a plan of one of the most wonderful spaces in Paris, which is next to the Beaubourg. Here's the Beaubourg with this big plateau, etc. And a wonderful, the building by Piano and Rogers. But right next to it is Place Igor Stravinsky. And in it is this interesting fountain with sculpture by Jean Tinguely and Nicky Saint-Phal. There's this animated wacko sculpture splashing and twirling around. And then beside it, there are these cafes. And so here's me looking at the section of the big plateau. Here's looking at the little space. And then I think maybe on the next page, then I was really interested. So then I decided to do a diagram of how the whole space worked with the old church, the cafes, the fountain. Here's the measurements of them. And then here's how the feathered stuff. And I said, this would be illegal in America, but it's really worked here very well. And, and then it's next to this woman and her child, and a guy reading the Figaro on Sunday morning and at the Dumagot on Boulevard Saint-Germain. And so the sketchbooks are they're not a diary so much, but they do record where you are and what you're thinking, what you're doing. How's our time?
Good.
We have a few more minutes.
Yeah.
So that's an example of that. And I think we're almost a wrap up chat.
We got the sketchbook over there too.
We got we got
We'll save that one for last.
Yeah.
You decide.
Doesn't matter. We'll look here. This is one from 2002, sketchbook number 132. And in this is, we'd gone to this little town. So here's an example. Here's where we went, and here's the map that shows, so I'm keeping track of the Rhone River, the Durance River, the geology, the Luberon. Here's Marseille and Aix-en-Provence. And then you come up here, and here is Fort Calquier, and here's Dauphin. No, here's Fort Calquier, that's Manosque. Anyway, so we rented a little place there one summer, and this was our roof terrace. Look at the color, oh my God. The one thing you realize is that Van Gogh wasn't nuts. He just recorded it better than anybody ever did. The color, these colors are fabulous. And one of the things I discovered when we were there in the place we rented was these are the minerals, these are the pigments. They had bags of the pigments in there because they, what they do is, where's the interior here? This is an interior, and what they do is when the plaster is wet, they do a wash with the color in it. So the architecture, there's almost no architecture. It's just a flat plaster wall, but they paint all these moldings and everything onto it. That's a real mirror, of course, but the notion of the color, that was part of what this expedition taught me a lot about, was the use of color, this green with that orange, with this blue and that teal, or whatever you want to call it, aqua. And oddly enough, Pablo and Oro managed to get the color pretty darn good in that book there, in the book. And so this was, and then this is another one of those, the eye goes for a wander. So it starts with the fountain and this, and then it goes up the hill, and then the birds come down, and then the eye wanders over, and then it goes down the street and around the corner and disappears. So that,
And when you sit down to do a drawing like this, I mean, how are you starting? Are you?
I don't know. I think I started here. but I know sometimes you start in the middle, sometimes you start in a
I
corner.
mean, do you have a picture of where you're going with it, or?
No, they're discoveries.
Right.
They're discoveries. So, I didn't know I was going to do this weird, look at that. Lou Kahn would have loved this. That's what this chapel looked like from the outside. It was a stone cube, and inside it was carved like that with a row of columns. And this is a section of it. I just thought, wow. So this is me looking at a canyon. We went up that canyon in canoes. That's my son and helping portage up the Gorge du Verdon. Who knew there was landscape like this in France? Not me, but it was really kind of fascinating to go. So the sketchbooks are full of discovery and curiosity. That's the village we were in. It's pretty amazing, And then you think, yeah, Cézanne was right. That's what it looks like. Again, one of those things of discovering that because if you come in real close here, you're going to see absolutely a piece of Cézanne in there. Not because I'm trying to be him, but I'm channeling the same stuff he's channeling, It's interesting. This is before Disney. There was this interest in taking objects and anthropomorphizing or animating them like this. That's the spigot actually that was on this fountain. That was here, this wall fountain where people see there's a little spigot. That's this guy.
And did you recognize that when you made this first sketch, or you came back to it and discovered the
I
detail?
went and looked at it more closely because all these kids would come and play in it, and the pigeons would come and drink in it, and then women would come and fill a jug and go off and wash their stoop with it, and that sort of thing. So then here's sections of streets and this interior, which how do you think like that? This is something that you can learn from, loosen up, Laurie. Just one of those moods, and this is, you do some things that you just can't help yourself. That was a pilgrimage to Cézanne's studio, and that's it. There it is. And there were all the little plaster casts and the skull and the shawls and everything that you see in the paintings of it. They're all there. And this wonderful cube of space to work in with this great light. I just thought that was magnificent. I didn't want to go. I felt it'd be too touristy, but I did anyway. Here's a different kind of spigot. This is at Forcalquier, and it's again another sort of late medieval town water hole, and then you do things just out of amusement for yourself, like on the train to Paris. Here I am on the TGV, and there's this dog, this sinister dog was studying me. Like he was really looking at me over. He was like this troll under the bridge almost. So you do things so that the sketchbooks are a way of being in the world, of really looking hard at the world and saying, well, what is it that makes this cafe? How fancy is it? Well, it's this kind of table and simple hard glasses that are hard to break, and the materials of the ordinary world that end up being quite humble and quite life supporting. Maybe we'll wrap up with this guy here. So you make pilgrimages and you want to record it, but I find that people who go around and take a lot of pictures and rush and see 4 cities in 2 days, what do they remember? What do they see? What do they learn? Whereas when I went, this Père Lachaise is a cemetery in Paris, and it's where various people like Adolphe Alphand, the guy who designed all the boulevards and most of the parks that we know there, is buried. But also this is Chopin's tomb. A lot of people go there because Oscar Wilde's buried there, or because this is the guy who was the head of the Doors.
Jim Morrison.
No. Yes. He's there. And so a lot of people, but someone comes and leaves flowers every day at Chopin's tomb, anonymously, and no one knows who it is or why. But I just thought this jumble of stuff, it was a cold day in March, I guess, when I did this watercolor. But I sat there long enough, on a tomb, and my rear end got sore and cold. But it was worth doing. One of the other things to say about this particular place is that places mean a lot, and everything means something. And so I felt that just sitting there, it made me want to go listen to Chopin. You know, I thought people worship this man still. He's long dead, but why not? And so it was a happy moment for me to kind of think about the winter trees, the bare winter trees, and the tombstones sort of tumbling slightly and all that, and the mood of it, and that someone cares that much. I mean, this is just a cafe, right? But it's, you learn when you draw it what the few elements of the cafe are. And you can see that here in Philadelphia, the people who did the restaurant park, they learned, oh, you need this awning, then you need those chairs and those tables, and you need, you know, that heater. and so this is the apparatus of culture and civilization, you know, and learning the apparatus and learning how to deploy it is part of what one wants to do. And so, but the sketchbooks are full of pieces of projects. They're full of notes to oneself. They're full of, you know, people that are in meetings that you're studying a proportion, you're trying to figure something out. I mean, this is the Henry Moore at Lincoln Center, because we were trying to figure out how to help them with that at one point. And so there are these various things. Oh, this was, when we were working, when Peter Eisenman and I were working on the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin, one of the things I realized was that I had to figure out how to do the sidewalk so it was going to not only be legal, but would work very well all along the side that faces the Tiergarten. So this is me making notes about the proportions, dimensions, the stone, etc. that I was going to do. And so some of the stuff is direct research, you know, and is applied, but usually it's not applied. Usually it's other things that you do. You know, you're in a concert and so you're listening to this guy play the violin, and you know you're trying to figure things out, you know. But it's, the interesting thing is, it's not hard to draw a tree if you've sat out and drawn trees. It's not hard to draw a chair if you've drawn chairs. This stuff is just all pulled out of my head. These people sitting on this with their feet in the lily pond. I didn't get to build this, but that's pretty nice. But one of the things about this sketch is that everything in this sketch I just made up out of my head, because I had been drawing the world so long and so carefully. I knew what it looked like.
Yeah, so this is a sketch for a proposed project, right?
Yeah. It was a project I was doing with Machado Silvetti for a competition that they ended up not doing anything, actually. And then, you know, you're in meetings, and so you like the people. This is Maxine Griffith, and you know, you like the people who are there. You find them interesting, but you travel, you go to a place, you think that's an odd building. How does that work? And so the how does the world work, and what is it out there, is part of what the drawing is really all about.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. No, so I'm going to go back, and you can take your mask off, and we can wrap this thing up.
Okay.
So that was great, Laurie.
Yeah, and now
It's hot under the mask, isn't it?
I'm back
Hi, Fred.
that was great, Laurie. There would be a lot of applause right now.
Well,
In
isn't this the
regular.
time Fred said, don't we usually at this point bring out the wine and the cheese?
Yeah, before that, we have Q&A.
Okay, I'm happy to try.
We
a
got to
few.
earn it.
But let me try not to go on so long with each one so we can do more than one or two.
So the first one is a very delightful one. It's not a question, it's an observation. Maria Landoni says, I feel like I am right there with Laurie. So
Oh, that's nice.
that's very nice.
Yeah.
And then we have a question. Have you had to refine your traveling companions to those amenable to your drawing, sketching pace? Or do you tend to amend your drawing to the pace of your travel partner's rhythm? Do they adapt to you, or you adapt to them?
Well, when I adapt to them, usually a lot of drawings don't get done. But one of the things is that I have tended to travel with people who understand me and put up with me, but they quite often I will plunk myself somewhere and they will go off and do something else, either for the hour or for a day. And but you have to travel with people. It's kind of like slow food. I don't really move around a lot except by foot, you know, I quit driving years ago because I had so many wrecks and everything. So I'm a pedestrian, but that slows you down to see things. And so in terms of my companions of traveling, probably 25 to 30% of all these drawings were when I was alone, traveling alone. And then, but there are a lot of the ones I just showed where I was with my family, and we would go somewhere and we'd stay there and use it as a base of operations and not move around. But we'd move around by going out each day, or I'd go for a walk, or I would go across the field, or we'd go to the next town, but then we'd go back at night. And so the notion of, it's like old-fashioned travel, not modern travel. Instead of moving constantly and taking pictures, which who can remember, and what do you do? And now that you can take too many pictures because you don't have to worry about you're using up all your film. What happens is drawing, very rarely have I had anybody who was irritable about it, and you kind of edit out the people who don't want to travel the way I do, I guess. I've traveled with other artists, and I've traveled with photographers and people who, while I'm doing something, they're doing something, you know.
And with students as well, of course.
Yeah, and with students. And with the students, you have to beg off and go away and put them to work at something so you can go draw.
Yeah. We have another question. How do you recommend incorporating sketching into your day-to-day life and not falling out of habit?
Well, one of the things is that I don't draw all the time, but I draw compulsively at times. And I would say that when I'm at home and when I'm in Philadelphia, when I'm in the office, I have to struggle to actually get time to draw because there's so many other things to do. You know, but when you travel, a lot of things go away. And if you travel and then are sedentary when you travel instead of constantly in motion, you can draw. So I would say I probably have been drawing as much since COVID and for the office as I have for the office for a long time, because we're all at different places. Some people on the West Coast, some people at home, some people in Virginia, some people here. In order to produce stuff, since I don't draw on a computer, and maybe I should talk about that in a minute, but in order to get my ideas across, since I can't sit in a room with Frank Gehry and we go back and forth, I have to do a drawing and send it to him or put it up on a screen. And so I've had to produce a whole number of studies and sketches since March, a lot of drawing actually on projects that have been quite productive and surprising to me. I think something for others to deal with, of course. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does.
Yeah.
Anyway. The next question is from Ian Sherling, and he asked, Laurie, who makes your sketchbooks? Are there others you would recommend?
Sure, I'll tell you, yes, and yes. Okay, when I was young and poor, now I'm just old and poor, but when I was young and poor, I would buy these kind of black covered things with this terrible thin paper, and you see what happens. They're not very well made. But I have a whole bunch of those from the 60s and 70s. And then I discovered there was this outfit in Europe. Who is this? This is Rowney, who makes sketchbooks, and they have cheap stuff you can find in the book. And this is even thinner paper, but it actually took the ink pretty well, and it didn't bleed. And so I thought this, and you could tear the pages out, which I've tried not to do. Those were nice, but they're too small and too shiny and hard surface. I discovered in Paris early on, back in the, I guess, 80s, that there was a firm in Lyon that makes these sketchbooks for an outfit, art supply store in Paris called Sennelier. And Sennelier, I think in the front of these books, yeah, here's their name. I've actually tried to order, they used to, like 20 years ago, you could get them down in pearl paints on and on Canal Street in New York, but they stopped carrying them. And then when I tried to order them by mail and sent them a check one time, a money order, they never cashed a check and they never sent anything because they just don't want to deal with mail orders. This was a while ago. Maybe they probably have to now. But I found that they had a couple of stores in Paris, and when I'd go in there, I would buy as many as I could to carry home in a bag because I knew I wasn't going to be back for a while. So I would try to get as many of the landscape form as I could. The paper is heavier in the red. This is red linen binding by Senator, and they still make them. I fear one day they're going to stop. I don't know, it may happen, but the paper in the plain linen sketchbooks is a little lighter, but it has a nice tooth, and it too can take a wash or colored pencil, as you see here. But I've discovered a few years, and sorry I don't have them here, but you know, this funny outfit called Moleskin, who sells all different kinds of things. They actually have a very nice landscape format sketchbook about this size, bound on the end, that has really good paper for watercolor in, and it takes soft media of other sorts. Well, so I have a bunch of those that I have drawn in ink and pencil and done a bunch of watercolors, especially in the Southwest when I was teaching with Tony Atkin. So I would say those Moleskin ones are pretty good. I wish they had them a little bit bigger, but that would be a good solution here in the US. But don't be afraid of using any, try to get acid-free paper, because otherwise the sketchbooks that Bill talked about earlier that I made by hand and when I was living at Agate Point out on Bainbridge Island, those I have to keep in the dark because they are absolutely as full of sulfites. They're just going to blow up one someday. But, so I think that, but you can go to you know, the various art stores here, and they have pretty good sketchbooks. You just want paper that can take a wash and that doesn't have acid in it. And the idea is that you think you can put it in your pocket, unless you're wearing some kind of really big military gear. Most of these don't really fit in your pocket. And I find one of the reasons I'm attracted to these sketchbooks is that I can actually hold them up and draw, and without falling down and having them flop in my hand. The bigger the sketchbook is, the harder it is to hold it if you're not sitting down. And so with the sketchbooks comes the other question of, well, should you take a stool with you? So those little canvas folding stools, I carried one of those around Italy. I carried one of those around England. I've carried them. I've had one in France when we were in Provence. Yeah. So, you know, I go out in the field. That way you actually sit down and put it on your lap and you can do watercolors. So, you know, the little the tripod thing with the canvas seat, that goes with these, which is not here. Okay, next question.
For designers learning about sites, you've kind of addressed this a bit. What is the difference between sketches and photographs?
Well, the camera is an idiot savant. The camera sees everything and it won't edit. You have to edit. So good photographers can take a camera and they can actually figure out how to frame, focus, work with light, and they'll get pretty good pictures. You can get remarkable pictures, but the problem is there's too much detail. And the thing about drawing is you can edit. You can decide what to leave out. And you can decide what matters the most. So I'll show you a drawing in here if I can find it quickly. If I don't, yeah, it's right in near here. So here's a drawing that I'll do this, and does that work for you, Bill? So this is a drawing that you can see it just has a few lines. This tree, that roof, this tree, you know, that thing, the door. It's a photograph of this would have way more detail, might be really attractive, but you'd spend too much time looking at the wall and not at the space, you know, in my opinion. The other thing is, obviously, some of these drawings have a lot of detail, but I'm choosing which detail and which not. And if I would say the differences that the brain and the hand are constantly editing. And when you make a mark on a paper, the next one is in a way a response to it. And you don't do that with a photograph. You know, and the problem with photographs isn't that they aren't any good. I have 10,000 photographs I don't know what to do with. But the thing is, I don't use them all, and I don't know what to do with them all. And there's way too many of them. And we're so profligate, we're drowning in images today, that the nice thing about drawing is that it really has to do with the eye and the brain and memory. And the active memory is engaged in drawing in a way it's not in taking pictures, usually, in my view. Unless you're Bruce Davidson or somebody who's a magnum level photographer, you know, Elliot Erwitt or somebody. Okay.
The next question is, I'm amazed to see how you move so freely between different scales. Would like to hear more about your process for creating some of the larger scale plan views. How do you get the right dimensions and proportions? Do you just walk around the whole area, or
you measure with, go finish, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Or do you use, this is an interesting part of the question, I think. Do you use maps as reference as you draw? Thanks.
I love maps. When I was 12 years old, I covered every wall in my bedroom with maps from floor to ceiling from all around the world. So I'm a kind of old-fashioned map nut. I love USGS maps. I love, you know, the maps in Europe. The European maps are really remarkable. They got every building and every path in the countryside. So sometimes, yeah, I will have a map with me, but for a lot of what I do, I use my own body to measure things. It's what I used to do with the students. I would have them measure with go out and paste things and figure out how big things were, guess how far something is, and then walk and get the measurement of what it was versus what they thought it was. After you get to a certain age, you have a certain sense of scale and proportion. You've developed, your eye has been sharpened from practice. I mean, it really is, you know, like that old joke about the man from the Midwest who comes up to a guy who's rocking back and forth on a curb in the sidewalk in New York, and he's going like this, and the man that says, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Carnegie Hall?" And the guy goes, "Practice, practice, practice." You know, the notion that by doing a lot of it, you learn what things are, how big things are. There are things that are great scaling devices. You know how in Japan they have the tatami mat, which is roughly 3x6. Well, in America, the tatami mat is an automobile in a parking space. And so if you look at the base spacing for modern office buildings and garages and everything, it all comes out of the dimension of parking an automobile. So when I was doing a drawing today of a project in, I'll get back to this answer, I think, hopefully. When I was doing this drawing of a piece of a park in Southeast Los Angeles that I'm working on with the project with Frank Geary on the Los Angeles River project. And one of the things I did in the drawing, it was a plan drawing, was I drew some picnic tables on one part, and then I drew a car with some people standing by it on another part, just to give scale to the drawing. So anybody looking at the drawing would say, oh, that's how big, oh, this space is that wide and this is that long. And so when I am out in the field, you know, some things you just guess at, but a lot of things, usually if you're a pedestrian, you can walk around and figure out how big things are. And I would say that because most of us have these cell phones these days, and if you have that health app from Apple, it tells you how many paces you've had, and you put your data in, and you can find out how far you've walked, and you know, you can do a lot of stuff these days. They have these things that actually, believe it or not, now that you can aim at something and it tells you the dimension, you look at it. I think that's sort of cheating, but it's a good idea. If you're unsure, why not get the app? You know, it's how far is it to that tree? 78 feet. Okay. So, why? I would recommend it to all of you. But I'm interested in, you know, in literature, how when you're studying poetry or novels or something, and they talk about close reading. I'm interested in the close reading of landscapes and sites, of going down into them and seeing the layers and thinking about what it is and how it's made. And so you see, I'm fascinated by curves, but I'm also fascinated by the big space. I'm fascinated by the height, the width of something, and by the thickness of things, the actual physicality of it. And that's one of the things that drawing helps you with, that is a problem with a lot of young people in design today who are coming into the field through computers instead of through hand methods, that they don't have that tactile, visceral contact with the medium itself, which I think is an issue. And so I think drawing helps you get back out into that. Even if you spend the rest of your life at a computer, when you're not at your desk working, if you could be out in the field, becoming in love with the actual stuff of life itself. Anyway, that odd answer to that question. But.
No, that was really great. Brian Haynes asks, our world has changed so much over the last 7 months. When you can't sit down and capture people in a place, what captures your attention?
Brian, that's a tough question, isn't it? Well, the place, everything is interesting, really, in some ways, but you have to, you're human beings, everybody is paying it, you're still on the line and paying and listening, and myself, we have moods, and some days you get up and you feel like this, you feel very great, and you want to go out, barge around and do stuff, and you see things differently one day than you do another day, and you're interested in one thing. If I'm working on a project that has to do with say a pond, suddenly I'm very interested in different things than if I'm working on a cafe terrace, and the details that come to my head and the things I draw and the things I see. And so at this point, the whole world is still out there, Brian. I walked across the Walnut Street Bridge this afternoon and looked down, and there was the Schuylkill River Park, and there were all these people out on their blankets like something out of the Grand Jatte by Seurat. So I could have gone down and sat down there, and there'd be lots to draw: people, cars, trees, the river, birds, buildings across the way. So I think the world is engaging if you want to engage it, wherever you are, at whatever scale you're on.
I've noticed that you're fond of animals in your drawings. They appear like the mean dog, but there's sheep and cats and all kinds
I love
of
animals.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? It just means that the animate, the world is populated with creatures, and they're quite wonderful and strange and amusing and inspirational and worrying. So like I was sitting here at Blanche Levy Park just before I came into the archive, and there were two very young squirrels who came up, and they're obviously immature, didn't know what the hell they're doing. And they knew we had had food. They had seen us eat, and they couldn't believe there were no crumbs. And they actually came up and sniffed at my shoes, and they're looking all around like, there's gotta be something here somewhere. and I finally made a noise and made them go away, because I didn't, rodents, you don't want to have another shot of some other kind, So, but I just think what happens is when you're out in the world, if you're wandering around, you sit somewhere. Thoreau said, if you just sit in one place, the whole world will walk by. It'll just pass by. If you just go sit somewhere long enough, the world will come past you. And I think that's true.
So another question, do you have tips for compactly carrying around drawing tools and watercolors, etc.?
Kits? Is that, was it K-T-S?
Tips with a T.
Oh, tips.
Tips.
I should have brought it with me. There's a, Winsor Newton makes, actually I could draw it. Winsor Newton makes a little watercolor box that is, if you see my fingers, it's that long, it's about that shape, it's about that thick. It's got a little cap. You take the cap off, and inside you unfold these two plastic pans, and there are a bunch of hard watercolor cakes in a full range of colors. There's a little tiny brush up here that you pull apart and stick together. And then there's this flat piece here that you lift it out and pull the top off, and it's a little water flask, and you can fill that with water, put the plug back on, put it back in the thing, and it's another surface to mix paint. And then there's a little ring underneath it that you pull down, and you can actually hold this watercolor box open in your hand like a paint palette with a brush, you know, and work, which is appropriate for the scale of the sketchbooks. And I've had 3 of them now. I break them, you know, the hinges break or things happen. You use up all the cakes, you have to go buy some more. Peter Shepard, who was the dean here when you were a student and I was a young faculty member, introduced me to them, and they still make them. You can get them on Market Street at that art supply store. You can get them at Blick. You can get them in various places. It's a wonderful little watercolor box. I've had bigger boxes, and I still have them. And you know, when you're really doing big watercolors, you need more stuff. But if you're on the road, you know, this is my weapon. It's a fountain pen, right? And when I was a student, I had cheap Esterbrook pens, fountain pens that were sold to people to write letters. You know, they still make them, I think. And then the Parker pen was no good. I didn't like the nib. And then for years, I used drafting pens, you know, the rapidograph should shake, you know, like trying to get, so that they wouldn't jam up, and, you know, that we were drafting with, with India ink. Most of the, probably 70% of all the drawings across the open field were done with a rapidograph, usually a 00, most of them. Anyway, it's fairly small, and so I'd have to scribble a lot to get the black areas, but so fountain pens really are good if you use good ink. Don't use any of the blue blacks, and you want a black that's not going to turn violet and just pale and go away. A lot of the inks are very unstable, so you need good ink. Pencils, I've found that actually you can draw in fairly damp conditions, even when it's starting to spritz, with Prismacolor pencils on paper. Won't run when they're wet. You can actually draw. So Prismacolor pencils, which don't smear, are good. Black, brown colors, whatever, I'm fond of. Ink, and then watercolors. You know, the interesting thing was in the 18th century and 19th century, naval officers and army officers and businessmen actually knew how to draw and did watercolors and all that sort of stuff because they didn't have cameras on, you know, Captain Vancouver and his guys didn't have cameras, but they all could draw, and they had to be able to estimate distances. They had to be able to measure things, and they had to be able to make records, and they all drew, and they drew very well. Ben Franklin actually, when he talks about the curriculum for a school, one of the things he says you have to have, it's not just about gentlemen or gentlewomen, it's about, if you want to be educated and be able to communicate, you have to draw. And so he has drawing as one of the fundamentals along with reading and writing.
We got a fan note. Rachel Shaddy says, "Bravo to Bill and to Laurie. What a personal and loving look at great work. So inspiring."
Well, thank you.
Dingwen Hugh asked, this is a nice question. Do you always finish the sketches on site? If time is limited, will you take a photo and finish them later?
I have done that on occasion, yes. I tend not to do it. And once in a while, I have some of the sketchbooks, there are some drawings that are from photographs because of whatever the situation was. But it's very rare. When I'm working on a project, say if I'm working when I was working at Chantilly, for instance, in France, I would take pictures and draw both, so that I would have my own hand measurements, my own drawings, the things that mattered to me. But then just to be sure, I would take some photographs also as a backup. But I didn't then draw from them. But sometimes, once in a while, I have, yeah. And I would tell you that when I was young, I drew from photographs a lot. I learned to draw by copying comics books and comic strips and illustrations in magazines and looking at photographs and, stuff like that.
I mean, I have a follow-up to that, Fritz, if I can. I mean, you showed us a drawing of a painting.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us just for a moment about why you draw paintings. Why do you go to the Louvre or wherever you go and you sit in front of a painting?
Actually, I have in my sketchbooks a lot of drawings of paintings, some of them quite careful and detailed, some of them very rough and quick. Why? Partly because I love art and paintings. I actually have a lot of drawings of sculptures too. Partly because it's making me see them. It's making me look at them, really look. It doesn't matter. Well, in the case of the Delacroix, it gives me a reason to stake out a position that other people have to get out of my way. So I'm there drawing, right? So I'm front. It's a way of claiming turf in front of a crowded picture. But I have in a couple of sketchbooks, I have drawings of, Velázquez paintings and of Corot paintings and of Goya paintings and of Rubens paintings and of all kinds of people. I have a whole bunch of sketches I've done in the Picasso Museum. Why? Well, because I'm looking at that Picasso and it's making me take something home from it in my head. And it's a memory. I mean, there's a drawing in, I think it's in the French sketchbook. It may be in here. I think there's a sculpture in the Picasso Museum of a bull's head, which is the handlebars from a child's tricycle and the tricycle seat. The seat and the handlebars makes a bull's head. And I just thought it's so witty and so brilliant. It's so economical that I made a little doodle of it. I say I draw. One way to learn about art is to go be with it, spend time with it, and try and understand. So some of the drawings actually are me looking at their structure of them, looking at how the forms in it and how they're organized more than the surface or the nose or whatever it is. It's more about that. It's about the organization. The Delacroix is, he's not the best painter in the history of the world, but there's a couple of his paintings that they knocked me out. There are other painters who I absolutely think are ravishing, but I don't do drawings of them. But Sargent's drawing of the Boit sisters, which is in Boston in the Museum of Fine Arts, the three daughters, the one sitting on the floor with their legs out on the carpet, and the two older sisters, and then that big, tall, blue and white Chinese jar behind it. I've done several sketches of that, and not because I'm going to go do anything with them, but because it's helping me see what I think is one of Sargent's greatest works ever.
Because we've got several more questions and we're running out of time, what I'm going to do is this is kind of a lightning round. I'm going to put a couple.
I'll try to be real fast with the answer.
And I'll put a couple questions together. And this is two questions put together. One is, how do sketchbooks help influence, inspire your professional work? And a second question is, some people recommend daily abstract drawing, and how do you think realistic and abstract drawings are different in helping people look at?
Okay. First thing is, there is no right or wrong way to have a sketchbook. There is no right or wrong way to do a sketch. That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is that abstraction, technically, what does it mean? It means you're abstracting a few things that matter and have more meaning out of something. And so those drawings are always important and always interesting. And they're not in conflict with anything else, because those are about deep structure and about meaning in terms of form. The notion of, let's see, there is more to that question. Help me.
Well, the other part was, how does it inform your professional work?
Yeah. I don't know that it has, but how could I say it didn't? If you draw all the time and learn from the world, how can that not feed into the regurgitation of ideas? I think the answer is that art learns from art. Nothing is, the cliche of saying nothing is new, that's not really the way to look at it. I think there's a photographer Robert Adam, who said that the only thing about, because I agree that there is no such thing as progress in art. I think there's change. And he said that the thing that's about change in art is the only thing that's new is the example. It's like you look at all the different crucifixions from, let's say Byzantine times through to the 19th century. And the only thing that's new in a painting by, or in an engraving by Rembrandt from an earlier thing, is his example, the way he did it. And so what I would say about why draw and how does it affect the design is I don't go draw something so I can go back and make it and copy it. I draw from it to learn how someone made something, or how thick something was, or why something seemed a good proportion. And so I become very interested in the why of something as much as the what. And when you're making your own work, you're thinking, oh, when I was working on Bryant Park, I had spent all this time in the Jardin Luxembourg, and I immediately realized that the people who did Bryant Park, it was heavily derived from the Luxembourg Gardens in some of its detail. But I looked at this railing that was in Bryant Park, and it was too flimsy. The balusters were too thin. They weren't that. I thought, why did they put these thin Florentine balusters in it? Because they hadn't looked carefully. They didn't understand the proportion. But I guess the thing is to say that I realized that part of the solution there was to clear out the mess and open up the space, because I'd been to a place and I'd done drawings of, there's a drawing in the French book here that I will turn to very quickly because it's right at the beginning. This drawing. I had done this drawing in the Tuileries back in 1972, I guess. And does that work for you in terms of light? And look at those trees and look at that ground plane. And I thought, aha. So when I was working, Bryant Park doesn't look anything like that, but the notion of that ground plane really needs to get rid of that stuff, so that, and get those trees back to being these columns. And so I had drawn something that taught me something that I didn't copy, but it informed my work very much. I think
so, yeah, that's great. I've got a really nice commentary that I'm going to read, and then there are 5 questions, and I'll combine them to make 3 questions.
Okay.
This is a lovely comment. And he or she says, no question, I just want to applaud the format. It was so much more moving to see these beautiful drawings over Laurie's shoulder and having his hands guiding us. As much as the pandemic and the state of the world is distressing, a silver lining is that I and others were able to see this lecture when in a previous time we might not have been able to see this. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
I mean, I wanted to read that just partially because, we are looking for silver linings, and I would agree that this is one.
We desperately need them, don't we?
We do.
Yeah.
The alternative to you is right now is the Donald Trump show. So
yeah. Is it on live right now? Well, okay.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So this is much better.
Well, I'll keep talking then. No, but
okay.
Go ahead.
I'm going to combine these two. How many colors do you are in your travel palette? And another question is, do you have any advice to someone whose skills aren't skilled at drawing, and what is the best thing to practice? So the tools, your colors, advice for folks that aren't skilled, and what's the best way to practice?
All right, I'll start with the answer about the colors. The palette is actually fairly rich but small in that there's yellows, there's reds, there's some browns. There's like 2 browns, 2 reds, 2 yellows. There's 3 greens, there's 3 blues. There's, don't use black and white. Just take those out and figure out something else you might want. But basically red, yellow, blue, brown, green, you know, and then, but there's variations, and they come in that little kit I was talking about. So it's I don't know, that's probably like 24 little cakes probably, about, I would guess, because there's 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, or no, 3 rows. There's 3 rows, and there's probably about 8 in a row. So it's like 20, 24, something like that. So that's the palette. You just want to make sure you can mix colors, you know, that you can take some yellows and some blues and get some greens that aren't on the cakes and stuff like that. You know, they're pretty fundamental. So that's one thing. For someone who feels inept and they never had the classes and they didn't practice before, how do they get started? What do you do? What I do with my students, have done for years, I start out, you know, kind of clumsy, and they're always astonished at the end of a term when we put up their work and they see how much they progress. The first thing I do is I have them do line drawings, outline drawings of objects, household objects, their shoes, stuff on a table, their furniture, the stuff in the house. And then I ask them to do the same things, the same, you know, household objects, you know, things in the kitchen table, things, you know, in their bedroom. And I just have them draw that. Don't try and draw all the plants in a leaf in a pot of plants to start with. Draw the pot, you know, draw a couple of leaves, you know, start out with simple stuff and try and get it so that you can actually get shapes you like and lines you like, and start putting it together. And then you can add tone and shades. Then we talk about shadows, but don't worry about that right away. The next thing to say is I'm telling this to my office people who've started a new sketch club too. Half of them have kids. I said, draw your kids. You know, you need to deal with the kids anyway. So give them a project, put them on the floor, and then draw them while they're working on their project. You know, that's something that's usually and they wiggle around, but that's okay. That means you have to do a lot of quick drawings. I would say draw your friends and your spouses and everything. Everybody's afraid to draw faces. Oh my God. So they're terrified of faces, but you know, do it. You know, they're not going to shoot you, and it's okay. But I then send people to doing things like drawing paper bags and drawing stuff, and then after they've kind of started and made a few lines, just do that for a month or so. Just outline drawings and stuff, and they're going to be ugly. The first drawings are always ugly. Actually, when I'm working on a project, the first drawing is usually pretty ugly. They get better. As soon as you do something, you can always make it better. But one of the things I would then say is that I actually ask my students to do copies of art they like. Like, go find drawings in the library, send them over to Furnace. And, you know, if you like Van Gogh, bring back Van Gogh. If you like Rembrandt, bring Rembrandt. If you're into Modigliani, bring him. You know, whoever you like, I don't care. Find somebody, a book of drawings of somebody you like, and then I want you to make several copies of different drawings, you know, at whatever size, but sit and actually do it. And because you learn a lot, because you end up saying, well, how did that guy draw the nose? And you say, oh, he drew this, you know. And so every artist I know at some point does copies. I was looking at a very interesting essay in the London Review of Books this week about Cezanne going out with Pissarro and watching him paint for a while. And then he borrowed a painting of Pissarro's and took it back to his studio, and he made a copy of it because he's trying to figure out what it was he could and couldn't do that Pissarro was doing. And I don't know any artist who hasn't done that. And it's how you learn. You learn by, you know, how children learn to speak because they copy people. You know, they try stuff out, and you know, you blunder around, but do that, a bunch of that. And if you're interested in trees, Van Gogh drew trees really well, but so did other people like, you know, Claude Lorrain. So get some drawings of, you know, they can be in magazines or wherever, but make some copies of things. And that's a discipline in itself. They've all, actually the nice thing about copying a photograph or a drawing is that they've already flattened it out. It's already flat. So you can see where the edges are, you know, but that helps you learn about how that representation works. And then I sometimes what I've done with students is make them draw from photographs. Usually it was with slides. You know, I put up a slide, and, you know, and we drew, because quite often I'd be teaching in the winter. We couldn't go outside. It was snowing or raining or something too cold. But the way to learn to draw is only by drawing. You can't do it by looking at it or talking about it or reading about it. You can only do it by doing it. And the only way to get better is keep doing it. And the crazy thing is that it comes. Everybody can learn to do it. Everybody, just as we all learn to speak, but very few of us are great poets or great novelists, but we can all write a letter and we can all, send instructions to each other. And you can read and write. You can learn to draw at the level that you can write a business letter. You can get yourself to that level, even if you do not have what they call talent. I mean, there's no question that some people, their brain is pre-wired and their DNA and whatever, and the dumb luck of their youth, that some people have more ability to draw than others, just like some people have perfect pitch and can start playing the piano when they're 5, and some people become opera singers. I could memorize every aria and I could learn every goddamn thing, but I could never be an opera singer because I just don't have a voice. And it's true about drawing and paintings. I discovered I wasn't a great painter, but then I discovered I wasn't a poet first, and then I discovered I wasn't a real artist that's in the Louvre, but I didn't stop drawing because of it. I actually kept drawing and I got better. And I got better and better. And my drawings today, if you look at my drawings, if you look at the drawings in the first sketchbooks, they're nothing like the drawings more recently. So there is an acquired thing. And so don't be discouraged. Just do it.
The next 2 questions, I think you just answered, but let me read them and see if you want to elaborate. I think the answer you just gave was wonderful. One is, do you feel being able to sketch well is a natural talent or more an acquired skill, or vice versa, or a combination? You kind of addressed that, but if you want to elaborate. And then for new landscape architecture students, do you advise them to start off by hand drawing? And when's the best time to move to digital drawing? So both of those, I think you answered, but if you want to elaborate.
Okay,
please.
yeah, I would just say that I think it's a combination. I mean, I had professors who I think had natural ability and were lazy, and I had professors who wanted to be good at something and worked very hard at it and actually got better than the people who had natural talent. I think there is a combination. Some people who have talent and then work hard, people like Frank Gehry, oh my God, he's a workaholic, but he also had ability. So some people are a triple threat, but I would say that it's, if you want something bad enough, usually you can leverage yourself to that ability. It's just, but you have to put in the effort, that's all. So yeah, there is such a thing as talent, but hard work, it counts for a lot. And then the business about digital versus hand, I think this is a both and, not an either or thing. And I think start drawing as soon as you can and keep drawing. Learn as much digitally as you can as soon as you can and keep doing it. And then you'll find an interesting thing. There was a partner at SOM I worked with many years ago. He was in Chicago, a guy named Bruce Graham. He said, Laurie, the funny thing is, the people who do the best hand drawings do the best digital stuff. And he said, and if I get somebody in here who's really good on the computer, I can get them to draw because they already have a sense of line weight and proportion and of color and density. And he said that the instincts, he said, are so clear and that they're not in opposition. It's like the difference between, I don't know what to say. Frankly, drawing is a human act of the eye, the hand, and the brain. And the machine is a very transparent machine. The machine is a pencil. On a computer, one of the problems with computers is they tend to make everything look finished. And that because it has to make a decision, it's on or off, and so you get a line. And so drawings on computers quite often look more thought out and more finished and more real than they actually are. They quite often are very flimsy and not very well done, but they're finished. And the thing about, and so computers, the problem with digital stuff is that there's too much detail. Computer renderings just drive me nuts because we have to get people in the office to understand about atmosphere, and that it shouldn't be the same sharpness in the distance as it is in the foreground. And things shouldn't be as bright there as they are here. And so getting people to understand scale in terms of distance and color and on computers is really been a struggle. But I think we finally are producing drawings in our office that have some of the texture and richness that the hand drawings that we made for many years, where we still do hand drawings. And in fact, we do both in our office. What happens is we will have work sessions where the first stuff is always by hand, first ideas and stuff is always by hand. And now with a Apple, what do we call them, pad, you can actually do those sketches by hand too. You can do the first sketches. There's an artist named Amy Silman, is that her name? Who has an exhibition on in New York right now, who does beautiful computer stuff. And other people have been doing nice things on computers, but usually it's an artist who's come over to the computer and knows what they're doing. I would say that what you want to do is try and learn the basics of both as soon as possible, and then keep going. Because what we do is we start with a drawing, and then as soon as we've got something, someone will go and scan it and then put it into the computer and start trying to hard line it. Then we'll take that and they'll work for a while, and then we'll pull it back out and we work over it by hand. And then we go back and forth. And so when I was working on the Apple project in Cupertino, I would say to somebody, we need a view from here, and they would construct a view, and they'd airdrop the people in, and they'd, borrow a few more things and plug in a few trees. And then I would sit over it with a piece of tracing paper, and I'd correct it, and I'd get more in perspective, and I'd talk about layering and what they should do next. And so we will go back and forth iteratively between hand drawing and computer drawings all the time in our office. We do it in plan, we do it in the design sessions, we even do it when we're redlining a set right now, which means we're correcting a set before we go forward with that set. And there's a set of drawings that we did for a park in Georgetown near Washington, D.C. And they pulled the set, and what we're doing is by hand looking at it and scribbling on it. We just print it out and you write all over it and mark it up and then take it back and go back into the computer with it. And so the notion, there is no right or wrong at this point. I think we have a nice new tool. It's really a good tool, but people don't understand how to use it yet. We're still learning how to use it.
Our final question is from our friend Tim Baird from Ithaca.
Oh, hey, Tim.
And Tim asks, are you still using a Mont Blanc? And if so, what nib?
Okay. Confession, yes. These pens cost too much. To all the students and alums and friends and colleagues, they cost too much. But it's a medium nib. Right? They come fine, medium, and whatever, large or broad. I have gone through, I never did have such a fancy pen, except when we were working on Canary Wharf in London back in the early 90s. A client gave me one, a happy client gave me one as a present for the holidays. Instead of giving me a box of champagne or something like that, I got a Mont Blanc pen from, that was the Reichman brothers, believe it or not. And I thought, wow. And I found I really liked it. It had a very nice flexible nib. And I could draw, a line this thick one way and then just turn it in my hand and and have the nib on edge and get a fine line. And I could begin to get modulated lines and different weights of lines just with a single medium nib. So about 2 or 3 months ago, I broke the last, I've gone through them, I break them, I lose them, whatever. And then it's just always, God, to buy another one, it costs so much. But so I finally broke one, my last working one. Actually, 3 or 4 years ago, we sent 3 off to a place in Texas and they repaired them and sent them back to us. And I went through those and one got lost and I broke one and I don't know what, the other one, something happened to. Anyway, oh no, I was using it. And then about 2 months ago, I managed to finally total it. The point had gotten to I'd worn what you draw with them so long that you wear the points down. My wife is left-handed and I'm right-handed, and she, when she picks up my pen, can't use it because I've worn the nib in a certain direction, and when she holds it, it digs in, it won't write. The idea that through drawing you erode an actual metal fountain pen, it seems like, wow, that's really something. But so I broke one and I didn't know what to do. So I sent an email to Cindy Sanders and to David and to Stephen Dubin. That's the CEO and the CFO of Olin. Two wonderful people. One is in charge of money and the other was in charge of the rest of the office and all of the office. And I said, I finally broken a pen as a piece of office equipment. Will you authorize me buying another Mont Blanc pen? I'm sorry it costs so much. Think of it maybe as a holiday present or a retirement present. And so they said, Laurie, for God's sake, just order it. So yes, Tim, it's a Mont Blanc, but it's not the fat one that looks like a plutocrat cigar. It's the actual, it's the small one. It's kind of almost like what were those princess phones? It's like the smaller, thinner one because it's less tiresome in your hand. Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably it, huh?
Yeah, Laurie, thank you so much. And Bill, thank you for opening the archives. If you've never visited the archive, it's a treasure. It's of drawings, and Bill and his staff are absolutely magnificent. So this would be the time of the event when we would have probably a book signing. And I would just urge you all to, certainly you know that Laurie is a wonderful illustrator and drawer. And I would just add, he also writes beautifully. There's a really clear prose, and the book is not only beautiful to look at and to study, but it's also a really good read. So I'd recommend it very highly. And I bought extra copies for my kids and gave them as presents and so on. So of course, one's a landscape architect and the other's an artist. So they really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, go out and buy them. I tell you, one of the reasons I'd like everybody to go buy a book and give one to their friends is not only is it fun, it's a fun book, but if it sells moderately well, the publisher is interested in me doing the Italian sketchbooks. And on last month when I was up on Wellfleet in retreat in a cabin up there in a cottage, I actually sorted through and I have now collated all the drawings I ever made in Italy in a sketchbook. I have a JPEG of every damn one of them, so I can begin to think about how to do the Italian. So if this thing is not a complete bomb in the marketplace, there's more coming. Okay. Here. All right, that's it.
All right, it's a wrap. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, and good luck to everybody, and stay safe and stay well.